The 5 words scrawled in a shaky hand on the back of a parking voucher were a ghost's whisper from a life he'd buried. They have me. Black Escalade. The valet, a kid no older than 19 with terror flooding his eyes, shoved the paper into the man's hand as he held the door to the waiting Rolls-Royce Cullinan. The kid's gaze flickered towards the street, where the taillights of a black SUV were just disappearing around the corner of the rain-slicked Manhattan Avenue. He didn't say a word, just gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head, a plea and a warning all in one. He'd chosen the right person to give the note to. He'd chosen the most dangerous-looking man in the entire 5-block radius, because instinct told him that only a bigger monster could stop the ones in that truck. The man who took the note was 40 years old, but he moved with the lethal stillness of a predator twice that age. Julian Thorne. To the world, he was a legitimate enigma, a titan of private equity with a portfolio that spanned from commercial real estate to bleeding-edge logistics technology, a fortune estimated at a conservative $10 billion. But to the shadows he'd crawled out of 7 years ago, he was, and always would be, the ghost. He was an imposing figure, 6'4" and built like a monument to controlled violence. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, a deep charcoal wool that cost more than the valet's car, but it couldn't fully conceal the architecture of muscle beneath. What it couldn't hide at all were the tattoos. An intricate tapestry of black and gray ink climbed from the collar of his bespoke shirt, covering his neck. On the right side, a quote from Marcus Aurelius was woven through images of a crumbling throne. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. On the left, a darker verse from a forgotten text coiled around a depiction of a dying star. What is built in shadow must be ruled by it. His hands, emerging from the French cuffs, were documents of his history. The knuckles of his right hand read, "Hold." His left, "Fast." Across the back of his hands, more delicate script detailed names and dates, a private ledger of debts paid and losses mourned. A 50-carat Franco chain of pure 24-carat gold rested against his chest, its weight a familiar comfort. On his fingers, 2 sovereign rings, heavy and cold, glinted under the city lights. He didn't get in the Cullinan. He simply looked at the crumpled voucher in his hand. The handwriting was feminine, panicked but precise. They have me. Black Escalade. He'd spent 15 years, from the age of 18 to 33, as the architect of the most sophisticated narcotics and logistics empire on the eastern seaboard. He knew what this was. This wasn't a mugging. This was a professional snatch. He hadn't felt this particular brand of ice in his veins for 2,555 days. 7 years. He'd counted every single one of them since the day he'd walked away. The day a stray bullet from a rival's ambush, a bullet meant for him, had instead struck the bassinet in the back of his car. The loss of his infant son, a child he'd held for only 6 weeks, had shattered his world. It wasn't grief that broke him. It was the chilling realization that the empire he'd built, the power he wielded, had made him a magnet for the very chaos that had consumed the one pure thing in his life. So he vanished. He dismantled his own kingdom piece by piece, paid off his soldiers, cauterized his connections, and used his formidable intellect and resources to build a new life in the light. A quiet, sterile, brutally lonely life. Until now. His thumb smoothed over the paper. A child, or someone's child, was in that truck. His promise, the one he'd made to the ghost of his son, was absolute. No child would ever be harmed on his watch, if he could stop it. He looked at the valet, whose face was pale with the sick certainty that he'd just handed a death sentence to someone. Julian gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't reassurance. It was an acceptance of the task. He pulled out his phone, a customized, encrypted device. He didn't dial 911. The police were tools for a world with rules. That Escalade was already beyond their reach. He dialed a single number. It rang once. Saint. Julian's voice was low, devoid of emotion, a flat calm that was more terrifying than any shout. Ghost. The voice on the other end was equally calm, instantly alert. Marcus St. Washington, his former second-in-command, now the head of his multi-million-dollar global security firm. Black Escalade, license plate unknown, last seen heading south on Park from 58th. Professional snatch. A woman. I need its location. Now. On it. Give me 90 seconds. The line went dead. Julian turned to the valet, who was still frozen by the curb. He pulled a thick money clip from his pocket, peeling off 10 $100 bills. You did the right thing, he said, his voice a low rumble. You saw nothing. You did nothing. You go home. Understand? The boy nodded, his hand trembling as he took the money. Yes, sir. Julian's phone buzzed. A map appeared on the screen, a blinking red dot moving rapidly down the FDR drive. Saint had already activated the network, pinging traffic cameras, running facial recognition on the drivers from grainy intersection feeds, cross-referencing against known associates of every player in the city. This was the machinery of his old life, now repurposed. A weapon he had sworn off, now unsheathed. For a child, for the memory of his own. Subscribe now because what happens next proves that the most dangerous skills can be wielded for the greatest good. Comment where you're watching from. This story will remind you that true strength isn't about the harm you can do, but the harm you can prevent. He didn't take his own car. The Rolls was a statement. He needed a ghost. He walked to the corner, raised a hand, and a black cab, as if summoned, screeched to a halt. The driver took one look at the man getting in and didn't even think about starting the meter. The old Naval Yard. Brooklyn, Julian commanded, his eyes locked on the red dot on his phone. And don't spare the horses. The cabbie, a man who had seen everything the city had to offer, just nodded and drove. He knew a king when he saw one, even a king without his crown. The red dot was heading for a decommissioned warehouse district, a place where jurisdiction was a suggestion and screams were swallowed by the East River, a place Julian knew intimately. He used to own 3 of those warehouses. It was a place you took people you didn't want found. Julian's jaw tightened. He was going to get her back. When he made a promise, God himself couldn't break it. The journey was a blur of neon and concrete, the city streaking past as Julian's mind worked with cold, terrifying efficiency. Saint's voice came through his earpiece, a steady stream of information. Got a partial plate? Belongs to a shell corporation. The corporation is owned by another shell, which traces back to a holding company for Dmitry Volkov. Julian's blood ran cold. Volkov. The name was a scar from his past. A brutal, ambitious Russian who had tried to muscle in on his territory a decade ago. Julian had crushed his operation, not with a gang war, but with surgical precision. He'd dismantled Volkov's supply lines, turned his lieutenants, and bled his finances dry until Volkov had been forced to flee the country with nothing but the clothes on his back. Julian had assumed he was a ghost, too. A bitter memory. But ghosts, he knew better than anyone, have a way of returning. He's back in the city, Julian asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. Landed on a private jet at Teterboro 2 days ago. Kept it quiet. The feds don't have him on any watch list. He's clean, on paper. No one's clean, Julian stated. What does he want? Leverage against me? My new life has nothing he can touch. That's what we're trying to figure out. The girl, her name is Ilara Vance, 22 years old, nursing student at Columbia, no criminal record, no known associations with any players. She's a civilian, a complete unknown. Ilara. The name was strangely familiar, a half-remembered melody. He dismissed it. In his old life, sentiment was a fatal flaw. The warehouse is Pier 4. Saint continued. Volkov has a skeleton crew there. Looks like 6, maybe 8 men. Standard muscle. They're not expecting company. They're not getting company, Julian corrected him. They're getting a reckoning. I'm 5 minutes out. Meet me at the west entrance. Silent entry. I want the girl out before they even know we're there. No alarms, no calls, no survivors if they resist. Copy that. We're already in position. The cab pulled up 2 blocks from the derelict piers. The air was thick with salt and decay. Julian handed the driver another $500. A new life starts today, he said, and got out, melting into the shadows of the warehouses. The suit was gone, stripped off in the cab, and replaced with a dark, tactical turtleneck and pants he kept in a go-bag Saint always had ready. He was no longer Julian Thorne, the billionaire. He was the ghost, returned from the grave. He met Saint by a rusted-out service door. Saint was a mirror image of Julian's past. Younger, but with the same predatory stillness. He handed Julian a suppressed pistol and a pair of night vision goggles. 2 on the roof, 2 at the main entrance, 4 inside with the package. Saint whispered, pointing towards a thermal image on a tablet. They're overconfident. Pride was always Dimitri's weakness, Julian murmured, checking the magazine of his weapon with practiced economy. Let's go educate them. They moved with a synchronized, silent grace that came from years of operating in the dark. The 2 sentries on the roof were dispatched with silenced rounds before they could even register the shapes detaching from the darkness. The main entrance guards were next, taken down in a blur of motion as Julian and Saint breached the door. Inside, the warehouse was a cavernous space, smelling of rust and stagnant water. In the center, under a single bare bulb, 4 men stood around a chair. A young woman was tied to it. Her head was down, her dark hair obscuring her face, but she wasn't crying. Her shoulders were set with a defiant tension. Even from 50 yards away, Julian could feel her fury. He saw one of the men, a brute with a scarred face, reach out to touch her hair. Dimitri says to keep her pretty, the man sneered in Russian. But he didn't say we couldn't have a little fun first. That was all Julian needed to hear. He raised his pistol, the red dot of the laser sight painting a perfect circle on the man's forehead. He didn't fire. He spoke, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space, calm and conversational. I wouldn't. The 4 men froze. They spun around, weapons drawn, searching the oppressive darkness that surrounded their small island of light. They saw nothing. Who's there? One of them yelled, his voice tight with fear. Show yourself. Julian stepped forward, just to the edge of the light. His face still cloaked in shadow, only the massive silhouette of him visible. Saint remained invisible, flanking them. You don't know who I am, Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the warehouse. Let me educate you. 15 years ago, your boss, Dmitry Volkov, owned a small-time crew in Brighton Beach. He got ambitious. He tried to take what wasn't his. He lost. He didn't just lose money or territory. I took his name. I erased him. I am the man who did that. A flicker of recognition, then pure, primal fear, crossed the face of the oldest of the 4 men. He lowered his gun slightly. Yet, it can't be. The ghost, you are dead. Retired. Retirement is a choice, Julian said, taking another step into the light. The gold chain around his neck caught the glare of the bulb. The tattoos on his neck seemed to writhe in the dim light. Tonight, I made a new one. You work for a man who is a memory. A coward who sends thugs to snatch a young woman because he's too afraid to face me himself. You have made a grave error. If this story is proving that a reputation built in darkness can be a weapon for the light, hit that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to see it. Now back to the story. He gestured with his pistol towards the girl. You are going to untie her. You are going to walk out of this warehouse. And you are going to give your boss a message from me. Tell him Julian Thorne is coming for him. And this time, I won't leave enough of him to bury. The men exchanged panicked glances. The choice was simple. Face the legendary ghost who had single-handedly dismantled crime syndicates, or face the wrath of a boss who was miles away. Choose, Julian said, the single word hanging in the air like a death sentence. The leader, the one who remembered the stories, didn't hesitate. He dropped his gun and moved quickly to the chair, his hands fumbling with the ropes. The girl, Ilara, lifted her head, and Julian's world stopped. Her face. It was a face he saw every night in his dreams. The same high cheekbones, the same defiant chin, the same deep, soulful eyes of a woman he had loved and lost 23 years ago. A woman named Serafina, who had vanished from his life without a word. Just as he was beginning to climb the ladder of his dark kingdom. This girl was her mirror image. The shock was a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He kept his composure, his face an unreadable mask. But inside, a tectonic shift was occurring. The men untied her and backed away, their hands raised. We don't want no trouble, Ghost. We were just following orders. Your orders are irrelevant, Julian said, his eyes never leaving Ilara's. He gestured with his head. Get out. The four men practically ran, stumbling over each other to escape the terrifying presence in the room. Julian waited until the sound of their footsteps faded before he moved. He holstered his weapon and walked slowly towards her. She stayed in the chair, watching him with a mixture of fear and something else. Recognition. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice softer now, the hard edges sanded away. She shook her head, rubbing her wrists where the ropes had been. No, just angry. She looked up at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. It was Serafina's stare. You're him, the one the valet gave my note to. I am, he said simply. I knew you would help, she said, a strange certainty in her voice. When I saw you, you looked like the scariest person I'd ever seen. I figured you were the only one they would be scared of, too. He almost smiled. A reasonable assumption. He extended a hand. Let's get you out of here. You're safe now. She hesitated for a second, then took his hand. Her fingers were small in his, but her grip was firm. As he helped her to her feet, he felt an overwhelming, fiercely protective instinct wash over him, stronger than anything he had felt since he held his son. It was more than just keeping a promise to a stranger. This felt primal. This felt like coming home. If this story proves that true heroes don't always wear capes, hit subscribe and share it with everyone you know. Because Ilara didn't run to the police. She ran to the most dangerous man she could find, and that man moved heaven and earth to save her. He led her out of the warehouse, where a black Maybach, a fortress on wheels, was now waiting, saint at the wheel. Julian wrapped his own jacket around her shoulders. She was trembling slightly, the adrenaline starting to fade. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. "Somewhere safe. I have a doctor who can check you over. No police, no reports. It will be as if this night never happened." "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at him as she got into the car. "I don't even know your name." "Julian," he said. "My name is Julian." The car sped away from the docks, leaving the ghosts of the past behind. But for Julian, a new one had just appeared, a ghost with Serafina's face. He watched the young woman in his car, and the half-remembered melody in his mind became a full-blown symphony. Alara. Serafina had loved that name. She'd said if she ever had a daughter, that's what she would call her. Coincidence was a fool's game. Julian didn't believe in it. He believed in patterns. And the pattern emerging in front of him was about to change the entire meaning of his life. The clinic was a discreet, private facility in a brownstone on the Upper East Side, one of Julian's many legitimate holdings. It catered to an exclusive clientele who valued privacy above all else. A trusted doctor, a man whose silence Julian had purchased many times over, gave Alara a thorough examination. Physically, she was unharmed, just bruised and shaken. She was given a mild sedative to calm her nerves and a private suite to rest. Julian dismissed the staff, wanting no witnesses for the conversation to come. He found her sitting on the edge of the bed, changed into a set of simple gray scrubs the clinic provided. She looked small and vulnerable, but her eyes were clear, the defiance back in them. He pulled a chair over, sitting a respectful distance away. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. "Volkov," Julian finally said, breaking it. "Why would Dmitri Volkov take you?" Alara looked down at her hands. "I don't know any Dmitri Volkov. The men who took me, they mentioned my mother." Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. "Your mother?" "She passed away 6 months ago," Alara said, her voice catching slightly. "Cancer. Before she died, she told me things. About my father. She said he was a powerful, dangerous man, that she loved him, but she had to leave him to keep me safe. She never told me his name. She just said he moved in shadows." She looked up, her eyes locking onto his. "She said she left him 22 years ago, without a word, because she was pregnant, and she knew his world would destroy me." 22 years ago. Serafina. The pieces were no longer just clicking. They were slamming into place, forming a picture so overwhelming it almost buckled him. "What was your mother's name?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Serafina Vance," she replied. The name hit him like a physical force. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as the carefully constructed walls around his heart crumbled to dust. Serafina. His Serafina. She hadn't abandoned him. She had protected their child. Their child. "I have dreams about her," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. He looked up at her, his gaze raw and exposed. "Every night. For 23 years. You look just like her. You look like the lady in my dreams." Alara's eyes widened, filling with tears. The horrifying events of the night. Her mother's cryptic stories, this terrifying, powerful man who had saved her. It all coalesced into a single, impossible truth. "She kept a picture," Alara whispered, pulling a small, worn locket from under the collar of the scrubs. "She told me never to open it unless I was in the worst trouble of my life. She said the man inside it was a ghost, but he would move heaven and earth for her." She opened the locket, Inside was a faded photograph, taken over 2 decades ago. A much younger Julian, without the neck tattoos or the hardness in his eyes. His arm around a smiling, vibrant Serafina. Julian stood up and walked to the window, his back to her, fighting for control. The grief for his lost son, the phantom pain of Serafina's disappearance, the cold emptiness of his redeemed life. It all swirled together, transformed by this revelation. He wasn't just a retired king. He wasn't just a grieving father. He was a father still. He had a daughter, a living, breathing piece of the only woman he had ever truly loved. He turned back to face her. The calm was gone from his face, replaced by a fierce, burning purpose. "Dmitri Volkov didn't know who you were to me," Julian stated, the words like chips of ice. "He only knew you were Serafina's daughter. He must have had her watch for years, waiting for an opportunity. When she died, you became his leverage. A tool to try and draw me out, to hurt me." He shook his head. "He has no idea what he's done. He hasn't just drawn me out. He's given me a reason to live again." He knelt in front of her, his large, tattooed hands gently taking hers. "Alara, I am your father." The words felt foreign and monumental on his tongue. "I never knew. I swear to you on the memory of your mother. I never knew you existed. If I had, nothing in this world would have kept me from you." Tears streamed down her face now, not of fear, but of shock, of grief, of a lifetime of questions being answered in the most terrifying and beautiful way possible. "She loved you," Alara sobbed. "She was so scared of your life, but she never stopped loving you." "I am not that man anymore," he said, his voice an unbreakable vow. "I left that life 7 years ago, but I will use every tool, every skill, every shadow from that life to protect you. I keep my promises, Alara." That night, Julian Thorne the Ghost went to war. It wasn't a war of bullets and bombs fought in the streets. It was the kind of war he was best at. Silent, swift, absolute. He and Saint systematically dismantled Dmitri Volkov's entire re-emerging enterprise. They used financial warfare, draining his offshore accounts through a labyrinth of digital backdoors. They used information, leaking compromising intelligence to his international rivals and to every 3-letter agency on the planet. They discovered Volkov wasn't just back for revenge. He'd established a high-end human trafficking ring, supplying the wealthy and depraved. Alara was meant to be the first prize, a personal trophy. Julian, using the intelligence gathered, pinpointed the locations where Volkov was holding dozens of other young women. He didn't send the police. He sent his own teams, led by Saint, quiet professionals who neutralized the guards and liberated the captives, spiriting them away to safe houses and recovery centers long before the authorities were tipped off with anonymous, detailed reports that led them to the empty facilities and the low-level foot soldiers left behind. In 72 hours, Volkov's new empire was ash. 47 women were freed, and Volkov himself was cornered, penniless and alone, in a hotel penthouse, waiting for a fate he couldn't escape. Julian didn't go himself. He didn't need to. He simply made a call to a rival cartel Volkov had double-crossed, gave them his location, and hung up. Some ghosts, he knew, were best left to other ghosts. In the aftermath, Julian established the Serafina and Alara Foundation. With an initial endowment of $500 million, its sole purpose was to find, rescue, and rehabilitate victims of human trafficking, and to build impenetrable legal and financial walls around them, so they could never be touched again. His redemption was no longer an abstract concept. It had a mission. It had a name. It had his daughter's face. 2 years later, the grand opening of the Serafina Vance Memorial Clinic was a quiet affair. It wasn't a gala for the city's elite. It was a sanctuary. State-of-the-art, fully funded, it offered free medical and psychological care to survivors. Ilara, now a fully qualified trauma nurse practitioner, stood on the polished floor of the reception area, looking at the simple plaque on the wall. She wore her blue scrubs with pride. Julian stood beside her, not in a suit, but in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks. The gold chain was gone, replaced by the locket Ilara had given him, which he now wore under his shirt. The tattoos were still there, a permanent reminder of the man he was. But the hardness in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, watchful peace. Their relationship, awkward at first, had blossomed into a deep, unshakable bond built on shared grief and newfound love. "She would be so proud of you," Julian said, his voice soft. Ilara leaned her head on his shoulder. "She'd be proud of us." She looked around the clinic, at the hopeful faces of the staff, many of them survivors themselves. "Thank you, Dad." He put his arm around her. "Don't thank me. You did this. Your bravery that night, the note you wrote, the choice you made. You saved yourself. You saved all of them." He gestured to the clinic. "I just built the walls." A young girl, one of the clinic's first patients, ran up and hugged Ilara's legs. Ilara smiled and bent down to speak with her, her voice full of a gentle strength that was all her own. Julian watched them, a feeling of profound rightness settling deep in his soul. He had spent half his life building an empire of shadows and the other half running from it. He had mourned one child and been ignorant of another. He had been a king, a ghost, a billionaire, a hermit. All of it had been a prelude. If this story reminded you that redemption isn't a destination, but a daily promise, subscribe, share, and comment below. Because somewhere right now, a person in the darkness is looking for a reason to step into the light. Later that evening, Julian stood on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out over the city. It wasn't his kingdom anymore. It was just a city. His daughter was safe. His promise to his son was being honored on a scale he'd never imagined. He was no longer just Julian Thorne, the man of wealth or the ghost, the man of fear. The roles had merged, purified by purpose. His identity was finally, irrevocably, clear. I was the king of a world I despised. I became the ghost of a man I could no longer be. Now, I am a father, and a father protects his own.